Welcome to the Radical Lifestyle Podcast, brought to you by Generation to Generation, where you'll be inspired by the past, equipped for the present, and prepared for the future as we engage in conversations with people from around the world. If you've been inspired by the guests that we've had on the podcast, please like, subscribe, comment, hit notification bells, whatever you can do on the platforms that you're listening on, so that more people have the opportunity of hearing these and engaging in our community. Hello everyone, this is Andrew and Daphne. Our guest today is Laurence Singlehurst. Now, we've known Laurence for a very long time, but Laurence, for people that don't know who you are, could you just say a bit about where you're from and some of the stuff that you've been involved with over the years?
Well, I'm Laurence Singlehurst. I'm English by background, live here in England, and I worked for many years with Youth with a Mission from about 1976 to 2002. And I'm sort of a missional person. I understand the process of mission, very passionate about small groups. I've written quite a number of books and booklets, about 6 books, 15 or so booklets. And in recent years, I've been involved in helping churches in the UK understand a postmodern culture and what is an appropriate way to do mission, both in terms of language and process, but also to think about their people. How do we empower the everyday, ordinary Christian like you and me? We are the front line, and churches are realizing they must do something about empowering people. Because if your Sunday's closed down or that's not really working, you've got to have more than one trick in your box. And small groups are back on the agenda in a big way, in my opinion, as well as thinking about what is the gospel message at this interesting time.
Yeah, for people that listen to this and say, we like Laurence, we want to find out more about him, maybe see some of his materials, where can they find some of that?
So if they just Google my name, you can see the books that are available. Grove sells some of my books. That's a British publisher, as do IVP. So you can go to IVP, put my name in, Laurence Singlehurst, and you'll see a book called Sowing, Reaping, Keeping. On Grove, I have a current booklet on the language of the gospel in a postmodern world, one on small groups, and one sort of on discipleship. That why have 24-year-olds left the church in the UK? What is going on there? And myself and a well-known youth worker did some reflections. So Grove booklets, you'll find some things, and IVP.
Okay, we'll try and find some of those links. We'll put them in the description box so they're ready for people to go and check out. Laurence, could you just, going back a bit, could you just tell us, where did your heart and passion for small groups come from? Was there something that happened that you realized, now that's the direction that we need to go in?
Yeah, because this isn't new. This is.
Yeah, and I mean, you've been doing this in the UK for years and consulting around the world.
So I did a YWAM discipleship training school in 1976, perhaps the third one in the world, and it was run by a New Zealander. And he had an experience of the early kind of ideas of small group in New Zealand in about 74. And when he came, this YWAM school, it was up to him to kind of shape it. But the normal shape was teaching and ministry. So it was all focused on the classroom and dynamic Holy Spirit ministry in those days. Well, he decided to add something, and we met in a small group every single day where we reflected on what we'd learned in the lectures. We prayed for one another. And when we got to the end of the school, even though some of the teaching had been amazing, some of the ministry had been nothing short of miraculous, really, but actually the life-changing part was the small group. And I realized that how important that was. And I did about another 7 years in that setting, running small groups. So I ran probably more small groups than many of us have had hot dinners. So I had an apprenticeship in small groups. And then when I got involved in evangelism and missionality, I went to a church that had a small group system where they had a pastor and an evangelist running the group. And the evangelist was in terms of equipping the members to reach out. And I wrote that into my book, Sowing, Reaping, Keeping. So I had this sort of I'd seen small groups in this new light, that they weren't just a pastoral or discipleship tool, but this can be a vehicle for empowerment. And not long after that, I bumped into Ralph Nader in India, of all places. And bumping into Ralph was always a life-changing experience. And he had a highly sophisticated cell small group system. And we invited Ralph into the United Kingdom in 1995, and it sort of shot off like a rocket. But it did have some issues and problems, which I can reflect on. But that's how it sort of all began, really.
Wow. Yeah, meeting Ralph is a life-changing experience indeed. So as you look around today, what do you see that says to you, this vision still holds, this small groups are still relevant? What is it that you see going on, not just in the UK, but across the earth?
Well, obviously, I know more about the UK as I'm still involved in lots of projects. And I think what we saw during COVID, as it locked down and Sundays had to close, that many churches kind of lost contact with their congregations. And yes, they would put something pre-recorded on a Sunday service. But to be honest, lots of non-Christians watched it, but a lot of Christians are drifting out. It wasn't powerful enough. Some churches like mine just put small groups. They had small groups going, and they did a live podcast and used small groups. And what churches realized, of course, is that the church member is the front line. How are people going to come to faith? Well, it's about how many people does your front line, your church members know? How many hands are you holding? Things that you and I have talked about many times over the years. And how do you empower people to do that? Well, Sunday just doesn't cut it. And church members are just unsupported and unencouraged. So churches have come out of COVID with, in one sense, a sense of we must do small groups. But actually, they've also come out very tired. Church members have slipped away. And I think we're having something of a mini crisis.
Yeah.
And it's kind of challenging because there's a lot of evidence, Talking Jesus, Rachel Jordan Wolf, that people out there are open spiritually as never before. So here is a wonderful opportunity, but churches are tired and damaged slightly. So we are in a bit of a predicament. We have dug ourselves a bit of a hole, and I think it's quite challenging to get out of. So we must get out of it. And I think small groups will come back on the agenda. And people like John McKinley and Bishop Rick Thorpe are backing these ideas. The Anglicans have put some very large amounts of seed money into 2 or 3 small group experiments. And that is interesting.
Very. One of the things that we were talking about yesterday, actually, that we are seeing is that there are Christians who are strong, healthy, totally okay Christians, and they're not in church. And it seems we're seeing more and more of this in the UK and in other countries, and it almost feels like a movement. I don't say to people anymore, which church do you go to? I say, do you go to church?
Well, Daphne, I think you've hit upon a real interesting issue. We've known that for the last 20 years that we've reaped some of the consequences of the wonder. I'm a real fan of the charismatic movement, but in one way, it did get involved in a little bit of consumerism, and it began to promise things that even the good Lord would have difficulty in doing. So that created disillusion and disappointment, and that started the drift. So that early drift out of church was kind of disillusioned, disappointed people on their own. I think we've seen another drift out now, which I'm not quite so sure of the reason. But I think the challenge is when you're on your own out there, yes, you can be a person of faith, no question about that. But I am as convinced as I ever was that we are not designed to be on our own. We're designed to be in family. And that family can express itself in a small group. It can express itself in a bigger expression of church, be it on a Sunday or some other time. And I don't know about you, but I need that. You know, I often think of sort of petrol out and petrol in. You know, we're giving all the time as a Christian person, but you need real refill points. And if you're not going to church, you're on your own. Where does that refill point happen? Well, I don't want to be critical of people, but I want to say the best way is to be connected. And church is frail. It's a human construct in one sense, inspired by God, run by humans, and it will always have its strengths and weaknesses. But I go because fellow believers are there. And as Ralph once said, you know, the Christ in me greets the Christ in you. You know, it's that family connection. And if the leadership is good, well, that's a blessing. If the worship is good, I'm happy for that. And if the preaching is good, I'm happy for that. But I'm equally happy if they're all not so good. In my church, we believe in member participation. We'll let anybody lead worship and preach. So we've got used to a quality that is a little bit up and down, but it's wonderful.
I like it. Of course, the scripture that has been very much in my focus with this seeing the problem, people being connected, is do not neglect the meeting together, even more as the time gets near, which seems to suggest this isn't something that we should lax off from, but it's something that we should press into even more as the time gets near. So that has been a deep conviction for us, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I think, I've said, I think I said this yesterday as well, but it used to be that you would see these people that didn't attend a church. There was to say they're Christians, but they don't attend church. And often I would think, well, what's the issue that you've decided to pick up on to just remove yourself from the church? But I think we're in a time, and we're heading into a time where it's going to get worse, but where people are actually kind of forced out of the traditional institutional church structures because of the ideologies. You kind of picked up on it a little bit in what you just said, but because of the things the church is adopting from the world's culture, maybe ideologies they're putting across, certain things like that, people are just like, this is straying from the traditional biblical views. And so are removing themselves from that and then finding themselves isolated. But then we pick up on the verse that you just said, but we need that community. We need the people that we meet with. And so, we're talking to a lot of those people and saying we need it. You need to find somewhere you can plug into that you can meet with people, even if it's just purely for the fellowship side of things.
I think you're right, Andrew, and I understand. We are going through lots of issues in all the denominations, and we are all familiar with these issues. And yes, people will find it more complex. A church that they're a part of, a church they love, might embrace some things they're not happy with. So they are faced with choices. But I think the choice is either to kind of stay and work your way through it and be some salt and light in that situation, or you're going to move on, find a group of people who are like-minded in a small group or in a church. There is plenty of choice out there. This is a postmodern culture. We've got layers and layers of choices. In the UK, we're privileged. There is churches of every size, sort, and description.
Yeah. Well, for people that listen to this and they say, well, you're talking about the small group being the place where people are really equipped and mobilized. Now they may say, oh, well, I'm in a church that has small groups. I'm in one. But maybe you could maybe the churches are not cell churches. They are churches with cells or with small groups. Maybe could you just talk about the difference between those two things, a cell church and a church with cells, and maybe how that fleshes out looking different?
Well, it's a good question, Andrew. I think a number of years ago, I had a pretty black and white definition of those two things. And in one sense, I still do. But in another sense, I think I've become a bit more elastic, trying to think of ways to create. And for me, I think I had a little bit of a revelation. It didn't really get taken up by lots of other people. But I thought about all the things that we've done in small groups where we've had, say, 10 minutes at the end of a small group where we are focused on missionality. And a lot of other groups are focused, as we have as well, some discipleship and some worship. But I realized we could actually take that 10 minutes, as it were, and bolt it onto any small group and give people a sense of intentional missionality and mission thinking. So I've always felt that there are three components, or perhaps four. You've got a God emphasis, you've a worship emphasis, you've got participation and a missional dynamic. And I think if you don't have that missional dynamic, you will miss out. Missional dynamics have to be intentional. They don't just sort of happen. You've got to confront the space. We're trying a new experiment in my small group where we're doing some more open Bible studies. And at the end, we ask a question. What have you learned today that affects you as a person? And we'll pray for you. But also, what affects you in your mission to be missional, salt and light where you work? We'll pray for you. So I think it's about putting in those 5 or 10 minutes where you address our missional salt and light mandate, which is for every believer. And I think if you miss that, or you think you can mention it once a month or twice a year from Sunday, you're incredibly wrong. This has got to be there because our hearts swerve to rot. And we're not naturally missional. We need that push, and we need to push one another. So for me, the difference is, do you have an intentional moment? And I've got more flexible on how that might look. And I've got more flexible on the package, but you still need some kind of missional moment week by week by week, in my opinion. And I'm sure in yours too.
Yeah. I don't understand, and I say this for myself often, as well as anyone else. Here we are having the greatest saviour there ever was, having redeemed us, saved us, our coming King, King of the universe. I mean, the enormity of who we serve is beyond our minds. And yet, we have a problem talking about him. We have a problem introducing other people to him. When you think about it logically, and I know this is more than a logical thing, it's crazy. Absolutely crazy. I mean, you wouldn't have trouble talking about, I won't mention it, your football team. But why do we have a problem reaching people?
You clearly have a problem talking about my football team.
I do.
You won't even mention that.
But why do we have a problem with the greatest news the world has got, and we have a problem with it?
Well, I think it's another really good question. And I think it is because we have two issues. One is language, that we have as Christians a set of words which are used to describe faith that are no longer relevant. They are ununderstandable to somebody who hasn't gone to church. So we have a vocabulary problem. But also, I think we have poor models. We don't have conversational language. Most of the people you're going to share your faith with are not strangers who you're going to see once in a lifetime. They are the people they are your neighbors, your school gate, your work colleagues, your club, your whatever it is. And in that environment, we're talking conversation. We're talking how I call it conversational tennis. You need to be able to share your faith in just a life-giving way. And as soon as people show no interest, you stop talking about it. I'm a member of quite a closed gentleman's club in London, which is actually men and women. But the one thing you don't want to be known as is a Bible basher. Your name is on the table, and someone comes to sit next to you, and they go, "Oh my God, I'm sitting next to Singlehurst." Don't want to be doing that. But that's anathema. What you want is people to think, "Oh yeah, I like that Laurence bloke." And yes, he has a godly sort of part of him, but they're interested because it's about conversation. And I think that's why we need small groups, because people can't get past these barriers without seeing examples, talking about it with friends. And I think we've just sort of locked ourselves out. We're either too intense, we say too much, or we just gobbledygook it. We just talk sin, repent, born again, and people go, huh? What's that?
I guess it touches on the difference between relational and confrontational evangelism.
It does.
Maybe a lot of people have lost themselves in the middle somewhere, and they don't know, wait, is it okay to be relational missional? Do we all have to be confrontational? And so therefore we're kind of like deers stuck in the headlights somewhere in the middle, and we've forgotten how to relate to people because we're trying to be somewhat confrontational, but yet maybe a lot of people aren't naturally that way.
I couldn't have said that better myself, Andrew. I've never heard it described in that way before, using those words, but I think that's exactly the issue. They're caught between that relational confrontational paradigm, and you're exactly right. They kind of freeze rather than work their way through that.
One of the most beautiful and easiest encounters I have had with somebody was, I think, what made it happen is I was prepared to look stupid. I mean, I know I live my life prepared to look stupid.
You often look.
But this isn't smart. I was sitting in a coffee shop, and for some reason, I'm putting that in inverted commas for those who haven't got video, I looked around and there was a lady sitting in a booth by herself having coffee. And I couldn't really see her, but I leaned back to look more, and I noticed she was crying. So I got up from the table and went and sat opposite her in the booth, and I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "You're not okay." I said, "I'm not being nosy, but I really care that you're not okay." Well, the end of it was, I said to her, she said about nobody cares. I said, "Look, I was in America." I said, "God sent me all the way from the UK to tell you He loves you." And I took a selfie picture of her and me, and I said, "Every time you look at that picture, I want you to know God loved you enough to send me all the way from the UK to say that He loves you." Well, I'm still in touch with her. I meet with her when I go back, etc., etc. And it was a beautiful thing that unfolded. Her life was falling apart. We met with her daughter, and it unfolded. But in that moment, it was for me an issue of, am I prepared to look stupid and nosy and go and talk to this woman I don't know, or am I prepared to take a risk? And I'm so grateful that in that moment I took a risk.
And it's a good story, and I think that's what we want to encourage. I am in this sort of environment, this club environment, and all sorts of people say to me, "Laurence, what do you do?" And I say, well, I help churches understand postmodern culture and how they can be relevant today and how their message could excite people. And they always respond positively, saying, "Well, Laurence, that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit more." I had one guy come up to me and said, "Laurence, I went to my church last Sunday, completely irrelevant. So I said to them afterwards that my friend Laurence Singlehurst could help them." He said, "I'm not sure how blessed they were. I'm not sure how blessed the vicar was." But it's when you put something into language that people understand. Oh, so that's what you do. You help people understand that God's important, and they don't deny it. They agree. Yeah, we think that's important, and then the conversation can just wend its way from layer to layer, from deeper to deeper. But I'm not in a hurry. They'll be there next week. They'll see me next week. We've time for this process. It's life, and we go around their curiosity. We want to kind of inspire it. And, you had a wonderful opportunity. And in your particular case, it's ignited a relationship. Well, that couldn't be better.
We have Muslims around us, and they're very involved in our lives, and we're very involved in them, in their lives, in our homes, etc., etc. And I said to them once, "What is it that you want to be like this with us?" I mean, they know we're Christians. We know they're Muslims, and there's nothing hidden about it, obviously. Very involved in each other's lives. I said, "What is it that you are okay with this?" And they said 3 things. One, you're family oriented, which of course they are very. Secondly, you are community, and they see people coming to and from our house. They see mission teams coming and engage with them. And the third reason they said was you're passionate about your religion. And yet we are told that we can't be passionate about religion. We're going to offend them, etc., etc. And I think people are looking for people to be passionate about their religion and not ashamed of it. What do you think of that?
I agree entirely. I think if you've got a warm front to people and they see you're passionate about things, I think they do like it and they are interested. And I think we want to be passionate, but we want to be passionate in a way that is not in days of old. Our passion was turned into confrontation, and it was all a bit mushy. But now our passion has to be turned into relationships, and we're not afraid, in the context of conversation and life, to talk about Jesus, to talk about what faith has meant to us. And we can't imagine life without some kind of connection in this kind of way. And I think people accept that. And if you say it in a soft voice, I think one of the things is we've gone from, to use Andrew's word, confrontational to propositional. So, I don't tell people I have the truth. I tell people, this is what I'm thinking about. What are you thinking about? You want to honor people's reflection, even if it's different from your reflection. But it gives you an opportunity to share your reflection. And if you share it in a soft way, then they respond. 1 Colossians 4 has become really important to me. In the first 5 or 6 verses that are talking about mission. And in about verse 5, it says, be gracious in the way you talk to people, yet put salt and light into that. And I think we need a huge injection of graciousness in a postmodern thing. And if you're gracious in the way you talk, the way you treat people, the doors are wide open.
And I would say in the way we listen.
Yes, I agree.
You said about how you help churches to be relevant in a postmodern world. And, the guy in the gentleman's club said, well, tell us more, Laurence. Well, let me be that gentleman in the club saying, Laurence, tell us more. When people hear about churches being more relevant for the world that we live in today, there's often examples of them sort of adopting the world's culture into the church to be more relevant. So is that what you mean by being more relevant? How does that flesh out?
It's a good question. No, it isn't about doing that. What we have learned, and we've sort of known for a long time, that in a postmodern culture, you've got to demonstrate before you talk. So for many, many years, particularly the evangelical church, we've talked first, listened a little, and done very little. And so in this kind of world, we've got to do a lot more, and we are. 90% of all food banks, which are in the news nearly every single day, are run by churches in this country. 90% of them. And people have begun to realize that the people who are helping them at their point of need is the church. Whether it's a mums and toddlers group, a food bank, all the ideas of the cinema network, we've learned that we have got to have Christ-centered social action where we go out, we engage with people. And then we listen, as Daphne said, and then we earn the right to speak. And I think that's the sort of relevancy we need. It's not flashing lights necessarily. It's not loads of gizmos. Even all of that might be fun. In the end, it's about, are we meeting people's needs? Are we listening to them? And are we talking to them without shame about our faith and answering their questions, etc.? So it's learning to do those things in a way that works for today.
Well, I'd like to take a little bit of a curve on this, especially with our paradigm. What relevance has everything that we've just been talking about, what relevance does it have for the emerging generation?
Well, it's a good question, and I think the emerging generation is a challenge. And as you'll know, youth work, just from my observation, and I'm not a youth specialist in the way that I was, but I have a sense that small groups are small, church youth groups are smaller, I have a sense that we are struggling, but there's always opposite. So you've got in St Albans, you have a program called STEP, which works with every school, and they are at the headmaster's invitation in every school, sharing Christianity in a lesson format in a way that is just highly relevant and accepted. So we are challenged with reaching young people, but actually, if we do it properly and we do it well, experiments like STEP show that the door is wide open and young people want to talk, they want to experience, they want to know. But on the other hand, youth work does appear to be in a bit of a challenging state. So there is things to do, and youth work's always gone through these sort of ups and downs. We had a bit of an up 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where everybody employed a youth worker. Well, that's a good move, but I think we need more stuff now. And yet, I'm clearly not the one. But my friend Dan Randall, do you know Dan?
No.
Do you know Dan, Andrew? He's works with Hope Together, but he's a leading youth worker, and he's picked up some of the things that Daphne and I were talking about 30 years ago, which is peer-to-peer, is about, equipping young people to be the workforce, to share to their friends, and doing all sorts of things that you guys were, and I'm sure, involved in over these many years. So I'm excited that this peer-to-peer stuff has been picked up again, and people are really thinking about it, which is a really good news.
Or maybe we can have him on to talk about that.
Yeah. Of course. I mean, we say to people, even within cell groups and small groups, that, our heart is multi-generational, to see them all together. And we say, but the really good thing about peer cell groups for youth and children is that they can use those to reach into the high schools, their colleges. And so there's a real need for those to be going in, but I guess it's the equipping side of it. Who is it that's equipping them? And so, often we, as churches, we hire a peer to equip them. But we say, we need the multi-generational layers. We need the adults, the older people, to take their responsibility, a command from God, to pour into, to equip, and to release the next generation.
We had fun in our church last Sunday or Sunday before last. We have a sort of a bi-monthly youth, and they had a 4-year-old help lead the worship. Well, how exciting is that? You create space, you create opportunity, you create honor. And I think I reflected earlier, why do 24-year-olds leave church? And I think one of the reasons is they turn up and there are no young people on a Sunday really doing anything. There might be somebody in the worship, but the key bit, doing the talking, they're never there. I mean, we've just got to open up things. One minister said to me, "Oh, Laurence, they may not speak well." And I said, "Who cares? Who cares? How will they learn to speak well? The only way you learn is to do it. And, by the time they've done it 3 or 4 times, they might be better than you."
Yeah, I mean, when Mum was traveling with me and my younger sister as kids, and we weren't, it's not like we'd had years of experience of speaking. She would just bring us up on the platform, put a mic in her hand and say, "What do you want to say to the people?" But it was because she realized if she wasn't first discipling us and pouring into us, then something's out of line if she's pouring to everyone else's lives. And so, we need to see younger people raised up. It's the world gives great responsibility to the next generation.
It does.
Governments, other religions, they pour, like key leaders pour into the next generation. I mean, look at the media, look at our schools, the high schools right now. Well, that's an American language, but, wherever you are, the world puts great responsibility on the next generation, but yet it is in the church that we don't really give them any responsibility or even think that they can handle the responsibility.
Andrew, you couldn't be more right. I'm of an age now where my eldest daughter is 40 and Laura, the youngest, is now 36, I think, might be slightly older. But what I realized, I talked to some of my friends, they're working in the Foreign Office and in civil service. I asked them what jobs they're doing, kind of thinking that they're pushing pieces of paper. Oh, no, they're not. They are incredibly senior. with amazing responsibilities, makes my jaw drop. And they're 30 years old, they're 35 years old, and one of them has helped run Cobra. So we all know what Cobra is. It's this high-powered meeting. Well, there's a 36-year-old girl from a Christian family. He's one of the people who runs it. Well, much more responsibility could you have? And I think you're absolutely right. We create no space. We create no honor. So why wouldn't they leave?
Yeah. Well, that's a bit, we can't leave on that note.
Why not?
We have to
we can just drop the mic there and walk off. We can be in charge of all these major things, rescuing people, overseeing military thing, intelligence, but step foot in the church. No, sorry, you can't handle standing up there on the platform and delivering a 15-minute, 20-minute word.
And it's madness.
We see many churches in crisis because they have not raised the next generation. We have seen, one in particular, a pastor of a multi-campus church, and he is about to retire. He has no one in position. No one. And the church is in crisis, he's in crisis. But if you look biblically, everybody was raising somebody up. Just everywhere, they were raising someone up.
Absolutely right. My friend Trevor, who runs the Network Church, he has for many years only preached 12 Sundays a year. And the rest, so we're a church of less than 100 people with 30 people on the preaching rota, aging from range 12 to 80. So because there's space, and we as a church embrace, the levels, and it's fantastic seeing men, women, children all having an opportunity to share at some point in time. And you go to some churches where there are hundreds of people, and are you telling me there aren't people in there who can speak well? Of course there are. But what opportunity do they have? Zero.
Which brings us back to small group. Because,
yes, of course
in a large congregation, however well-intentioned you are, there is no way you can empower everybody. There's no way you can cheer everybody on, disciple everybody. Sadly, discipleship has become a book, a class, something like that. You're going to discipleship class. Well, they're good for supporting discipleship, but they aren't discipleship. So I think we've come full circle to say, if it's going to be every member in ministry, it has to be a small group in a safe, caring, supportive environment where if you make a mess, it really doesn't matter because we're all on a journey.
I agree entirely. I couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
Laurence, thank you so much. It's always great catching up. We were just joking before we started recording that we thought it was time for a catch up, but the only way we'd get him is to have him on the podcast. So we appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully we can get together face to face soon and really catch up properly.
Thanks.
Let's do it, guys. I've enjoyed it very much. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Remember, if it inspired you, share it with others so we can see more people engaged in this community.